Lost Coaster of Superstition Mountain at Indiana Beach is truly a one-of-a-kind ride. This wooden coaster is one of the most bizarre attractions in the world, and it's really amazing that it even exists. Built by Custom Coasters International, or CCI for short, Lost Coaster was the last ride finished by the revered wooden coaster manufacturer before they went bankrupt. But at least CCI went out with a bang and delivered this memorable creation. The Superstition Mountain Mine Ride was a beloved dark ride designed in-house by Indiana Beach. This attraction opened in the late 1970s. While unique, this attraction was littered with problems. The ride had a dreadful capacity and an unacceptable amount of downtime, the latter of which wasn't helped by the ride's inability to run in the rain. Something had to be done. In the early 2000s, Indiana Beach decided that they wanted to revamp Superstition Mountain. They wanted to maintain the ride's charm, but they needed an all-new ride system with a higher throughput. So the park thought outside the box and approached Custom Coasters International with a radical idea. What if Superstition Mountain could be converted into a roller coaster? CCI previously built Hoosier Hurricane for Indiana Beach in 1994, and later Cornball Express in 2001. And I'm sure many companies would have scoffed at the proposal. Superstition Mountain was too small for a traditional roller coaster. Heck, I don't even think a conventional wild mouse could have fit inside this building with the clearances. Superstition Mountain, as it stood, had the insufficient clearances I just mentioned, plus you had no room for a lift hill. But what did CCI do? They innovated, and somehow they shoehorned the Lost Coaster of Superstition Mountain into that tiny plot of land. So just 1 year later, in June of 2002, the Lost Coaster opened, and I don't think we'll ever see another coaster quite like it. Let's start with the trains. At the time, CCI had either used Philadelphia Toboggan Company or Gerstlauer coaster trains. Both manufacturers provide conventional wooden coaster trains, but it was clear from the start these trains wouldn't cut it. They would not be able to navigate the sharp turns needed inside Superstition Mountain. Something more compact, akin to a wild mouse car, was needed, but the low clearances required additional safety measures, so CCI had something custom made. The result were the caged mine cars Lost Coaster operates with today. Each train on Lost Coaster consists of two 4-person cars, and each car consists of forwards and backwards seating. Remember, one of the biggest reasons for the conversion was to improve capacity, and I don't think there would have been sufficient legroom in each vehicle for 2 rows of conventional seating back to back. So CCI made the decision to have riders sit face to face. While taller riders may have to fight for legroom, I loved this decision because it did improve the ride's capacity while offering the more thrilling backward seats. And thankfully these seats are extremely well padded. They feel like leather sofas. And that's really important because Lost Coaster is not the smoothest ride, but more on that in a bit. Moving on to the restraints, riders have just a seatbelt and an extremely loose lap bar. Chances are you won't even notice the lap bar there unless you hold on to it. The lap bar rests a good foot or so above the lap of most riders. On the inside seats, the lap bar is actually fixed. On the outside seats, the lap bar swivels down when the cage is closed. And of course, I need to talk about the cage. To address the clearance issue, CCI added netting around the entire car. This prevents riders from sticking their limbs out during the ride. And ultimately, some may find the seating configuration a bit claustrophobic, but the hodgepodge nature of the cars adds to the wildness of the coaster in my opinion. As for the lack of space, CCI ditched the traditional lift hill in favor of an elevator lift. It's the only wooden coaster in the world with an elevator lift. This element was added out of necessity, but it also really adds to the experience. It feels like a mineshaft elevator, which really ties into the ride's theme. Now, Lost Coaster may stand just 35 feet tall and only reach a top speed of 20 miles per hour, but stats are deceiving. This really is an intense little ride. Most of the coaster weaves its way through Superstition Mountain, so you have countless sharp hairpin turns and sudden dips. Keep in mind, this coaster is following a course previously occupied by a dark ride, and you've seen how tight some of those clearances on a dark ride can be. Now take those turns with the speed of a roller coaster. But there is also a section of the ride that juts out from the mountain, going out over the water and antique autos. Off-ride, this section may look fairly tame, but just look at the track profiling. The abruptness and non-linearity of Lost Coaster's track is what makes it such a wild ride. Before delving into my review, I want to talk about some design flaws with Lost Coaster that have impacted it over the years. First, capacity. One of the biggest reasons for Lost Coaster's conversion was to improve capacity. When Lost Coaster opened, it operated with 3 trains. So in terms of hourly throughput, it was an improvement over the old dark ride. But Lost Coaster also brought renewed interest in the ride and attracted larger crowds than the old mine ride. Because of the long ride time and short single train, Lost Coaster is almost always guaranteed to have the worst line in the park. If all the switchbacks are full, this queue can take an hour, so make sure you head here first. That's especially true if you're visiting on a busy day. Another issue with Lost Coaster is the ride's smoothness, or lack thereof. Now, this element doesn't bother me one bit because the trains are extremely well padded, and the rough and tumble nature of the ride really gives it a unique out-of-control feeling. I always come off this coaster laughing at just how wrong the profiling is. But I know several people that find this coaster too rough. Not only do you have the abrupt transitions, but this is also a wood coaster. So you have the sudden laterals combined with some jackhammering and shaking akin to a rough wooden coaster. Last but not least, Lost Coaster is very prone to valleying. While the ride starts with an elevator lift, it does have a booster lift at the very end of the ride to return the train to the station. And this is where the coaster can valley. This is actually why Lost Coaster has a 4-person minimum rider requirement, and it's also why the operator is instructed to front load the lead car. If more weight is in the back car, Lost Coaster can fail to engage the final booster lift. From my experiences at Indiana Beach, this is the number one reason why this coaster will go down throughout the course of the day. If it valleys, the park needs to reset it. So while Lost Coaster is definitely a bit problematic, I think the pros outweigh the cons. If you want the most intense ride experience, I strongly recommend the backward seats in the back car. Not only do you get the added whip of the front car, but the backward seating hides the ride's wonky layout. For me, the thrill of Lost Coaster is not seeing all those abrupt transitions coming and how the ride tosses you about like a rag doll. If you ride traveling forwards, your body can better prepare itself. So if you want a more comfortable ride experience, definitely consider the forward-facing seats. Lost Coaster begins with the aforementioned vertical lift. And one of the most subtle quirks about this lift is that you don't come to a controlled stop like most elevator lifts. On this one, you roll forwards until you hit a bumper. You bounce back a bit and then roll forward, coming to a complete stop. It's a small detail, but it's another thing that adds to the ride's unhinged nature. The lift actually has some narration, basically questioning why you're even entering the mountain. But it is a bit difficult to hear. I really wish this narration was louder. And most surprisingly, there are actually multiple audio recordings. I heard at least 2 different versions of the spiel, but I have no clue if there are even more than that. Lost Coaster begins with an elevated section above the mountain, and it's also home to the most vicious laterals on the ride as you encounter some really crazy hairpin turns. These turns are as tight as those in a conventional Wild Mouse, except the turns on Lost Coaster also dip downwards, so you're accelerating into the hairpin turns, which violently will throw you to the side. Thankfully, the cars are very well padded like I mentioned, otherwise this would be excruciatingly painful. This eventually leads into a twisted double down, and the second drop actually gives some airtime due to its steepness. That then leads into the best sustained laterals on the ride, this sweeping turn alongside the antique autos. You will be pressed alongside your riding partner for this bit. You then bounce your way back into Superstition Mountain, getting a brief moment to catch your breath. But then the wildness continues as you traverse another series of hairpin turns in almost total darkness. There isn't much to look at during this section of the ride, but it's not like you'd have time to appreciate it anyway. You are being thrown left, right, and every which way. After a few turns, you come to a dead halt. If you're traveling backwards, do make sure to turn around because there's actually a brief show scene. it looks like there's blasting up ahead, and so the miner literally will yell fire in the hole, just like the beloved ride at Silver Dollar City, and then you head down a curved double down. Like the first double down, you get a tiny pop of airtime on the second drop, but this one also combines wicked laterals. And believe it or not, this element actually used to be wilder. When I first rode Lost Coaster, you did not come to a stop here. So as a result, you flew down the double down with even more speed. So that tiny pop of airtime became a bona fide pop of ejector airtime. And that was downright terrifying with such minimalistic restraints and those aforementioned laterals. You briefly emerge from the mountain, only to re-enter it moments later. You then whip through a few more sharp hairpin turns. Notice a theme? And then there are a few static figures along the way, but these are pretty difficult to make out because of how quickly you're breezing past them. You then re-emerge from the mountain again and slowly round a corner. You then plunge down the final drop of the ride. This drop feels like the steepest one, but it doesn't offer any airtime because you crest it with so little speed. I remember getting more airtime back before there was the stop halfway through the ride. However, this drop still feels downright wild because back row riders cannot see it coming, and it's followed by another series of unbanked hairpin turns. And the last turn is augmented with a loud jump scare that I never noticed on my first visit. If the ride works correctly, you'll then climb back into the station, ending one of the weirdest coaster experiences in the world. So what would I rate Lost Coaster of Superstition Mountain? I'd give it an 8.5 out of 10. And this hybrid coaster dark ride earns that score for two reasons: its uniqueness and its wildness. If you can find a wilder coaster that travels just 20 miles per hour, please let me know. I'm still in awe that this coaster even exists. The unbelievably tight transitions and rough track work make it feel like you're riding a shopping cart down a mountainside. And I mean that in the best way possible. I always come off this ride laughing. Now, Lost Coaster is not for everyone. As I mentioned earlier, this coaster is far from smooth. But if you love unique coasters that throw you about, into padding remember, Lost Coaster should be atop your bucket list. I'm glad I got a chance to re-ride this attraction in 2020 after Indiana Beach reopened, because I was able to remember just how fantastic this ride is. What are your thoughts about Lost Coaster of Superstition Mountain, or the dark ride that preceded it? I would love to hear your comments about this bizarre attraction down below. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate if you gave this video a like and considered subscribing, since there will be more roller coaster reviews on the way here at Canopy Coaster. Thank you for listening.